Good morning and good afternoon. My name is Mike Shannon. I'm the President of Government Solutions for IP Talents. I want to welcome you to our webinar on the CHIPS Act, Chips on the Table. This is the Creating Helpful Incentives to Produce Semiconductors Act that was passed just a couple of weeks ago, just before the August recess started. There was a lot of back and forth to get it there. Today, we're going to talk about some of the biggest surprises within the CHIPS Act. Some of it will be surprises to some of you. All of it may be surprises to some of you. First, let me tell you a little
Thanks,
bit
Mike.
about, go ahead.
Sorry, Mike. This is Alan Phelps, the CEO of IP Talents. I just wanted to do a little bit of housekeeping as a few people are still joining us here. If you have a question, since this is an interactive live session, you can use the chat features and the question feature on the GoToWebinar dashboard that you have, and we'll take a look at those chats and questions as we go through. We might catch up with you at the end of the presentation so that we can make sure that we give you plenty of time, but we will try to answer as we go along. And if you want to grab our attention, just raise your hand using the interactive dashboard. Thanks, Mike. Sorry to interrupt. I just wanted to make sure we cover that administrative piece.
Nope, absolutely. Thank you. Well, let's take a couple of moments to tell you a little bit about who we are and what we do. Our mission is to help you protect your intellectual property. We help you protect your trade secrets, inventions, internal expertise, all of the intellectual property and knowledge that's generated through your research activities. We do that using our Insider Risk Management platform, which is a state-of-the-art tool that's light years ahead of many of the major data plans that are out there that you can get at, that provide you a lot of data, but they don't provide you a lot of context. We cross-reference the large data sources that we're able to access with our proprietary threat intelligence that gives you a risk rating for what risks you may be confronting of potential bad affiliations or affiliations you may not be aware of that you might not want to be a part of. Our services include a cost-effective turnkey management service solution. So we can support your current program, or we can enhance your current program, or we can build you a program from scratch. And this is becoming more and more important. We're getting a lot of calls since NSPM 33 in January, and now with the CHIPS Act mandating that if you've got 50 million or more in research funding, you've got to have a research security program. And if you have aspirations to reach that goal, you're going to need one. We work with U.S. federal agencies, national laboratories, R1s and R2 research universities, and any private enterprise that is working with or relies on the critical suppliers to do their operations. And we're based in Dallas, Texas. So a little background on why we're here and why the CHIPS Act was necessary, as well as NSPM 33. You are up against a sophisticated government-sponsored program to target your information. It's specifically targeting U.S. trade secrets and intellectual property, but that often emerges out of the research that many of you are participating in. Some of the factors that are driving that research security push include the targeting very directly of researchers, unreported research affiliations and support that universities and institutions are not aware of. Their researchers are out building collaborations as they should be, but then they're also entering into agreements that that bind or apply to the university, perhaps unbeknownst to the university. And they're doing this with some affiliations that are with high-risk entities. This leaves universities and federal grant awardees an inability to confirm the veracity of their conflict of interest disclosures. And as you know, when you submit a grant application, you have got to certify that it's complete and accurate. And the only way to know that is to be checking. And relying on the word of the researcher has proven to be not the best veracity check. That's part of the problem, but another part of the problem has been for generations. This has been a generational problem. There's been sporadic federal oversight. As a recovering bureaucrat, I'm the former director of oversight and compliance at the National Institutes of Health. And as a recovering bureaucrat, I can tell you that the federal government has not done what it's supposed to do when it comes to providing the oversight and maintaining compliance as they should. They are now, and Congress is mandating that they do that. At IP Talents, we've conducted over 4,500 investigations, and that data tells us a couple of things. First, it lets us know that up to 5% of your employees are working for the best interest of someone else. That's everything from somebody who's looking for another job and thinking about plugging their thumb drive in to take their some of their presentations or some of what they've written with them to give them a leg up at their new position, all the way up to a threat actor who's trying to steal your intellectual property and working on behalf of a foreign government. We also found that 85% of researchers with US federal funding have some type of undisclosed foreign research interest. That sounds like a really big number because it is a really big number. This is based on our investigative process, and that number has held true at many of our clients as we run their data and identify what their risk level is. And finally, one thing that is absolutely critical to remember out of all of this is a conduct activity. This is not a cultural activity. And the CHIPS Act talks about not targeting and not having any type of discriminatory practice, nor do we. We focus on behavior. And unfortunately, what we have found in our investigations is that up to 95% of the behavior that reaches undisclosed foreign research collaborations includes inures to the benefit of China. So let's dive in. The CHIPS Act 2022. There are 5 big surprises in this. First, regional technology and innovation hubs. This is a terrific investment that the United States is going to be making in innovation. We learned some lessons from Operation Warp Speed with those public-private collaborations. We've also learned lessons on how we, as a result of COVID, our over-reliance on external innovation and external drawing in where manufacturing takes place. This is an effort to recapture some of that and to make ourselves, from an innovation and technology perspective, less dependent on any outside place. So you're hearing things about the advanced projects, advanced research projects agencies like ARPA-H and ARPA-E, health and energy. Those are all investments to help us be more innovative and more rapidly innovative. There's entrepreneurial fellowships, planning and capacity building awards. There's new guidelines on visiting researchers. We're going to go in more in depth in this in a few slides, but I just wanted to touch on those first 5 so that you get what you came for to see what those are. The visiting researchers, that's interesting. The State Department has been given instruction by Congress to be more stringent on the visas and how they apply to visiting researchers. And there's requirements now to review a visiting researcher's background. So not only do you have to check your research staff, but you've got to look at who's coming in and what they're going to have access to. The good news is there's technology out there, some of which we deploy, that can help you say yes to a visiting researcher. Even if that researcher poses some level of risk, you can put tools in place to mitigate that risk and still say yes and benefit from that collaboration. And then finally, it's not a big surprise, but it was surprising to see it incorporated into CHIPS at the 11th hour in August, and that's implementing research security management standards. Many of the provisions of CHIPS focuses on the large investment. I talked about the large-scale science facility construction projects. DOE and NSF are getting funding for that. Some of the smaller research and development facilities, they're emphasizing promoting diversity and equity. This is a big push for the administration to increase inclusion in the STEM workforce through grant support and work research, and pushing dollars to previously underrepresented research entities. This creates opportunities for research security and those of you that have strong programs or proactive programs in assisting them. It expands the EPSCoR program to, again, increase the competitive nature, setting aside funds for states and territories that have historically received a smaller share of the research fund. Increases the budget allocations quite a bit in that area. And in a large area of interest that's been going on for about 5 or 6 years is the focusing on sexual harassment. So agencies, are requiring all their awardees to report back to them any decision that's made to launch a formal investigation on a sex-based or sexual harassment incident involving grant personnel on a grant. That they have moved that to a materiality consideration, therefore you must report to them. But today's focus, those are some of the big provisions of CHIPS, but today's focus is on research security. So the rest of the slides will focus on that topic. you're going to get a sense of Congress as you read this 1,100-page act. Congress took the America's Competes Act and the U.S. Innovation and Competition Act, and they were in reconciliation just before the end of recess, and they were able to combine those, but they never got it out of reconciliation. They pushed it into the CHIPS Act. And unfortunately, some of the provisions that should have gone in didn't, but many of them did. Senator Portman tried to get more stringent requirements in there, and he was unsuccessful, not because they're bad requirements, but because they were requiring too much back and forth, and they were afraid they wouldn't get the CHIPS Act across the finish line if they had continued that discussion. But it's very important to note that there are still more legislative initiatives pending. Senator Portman's not finished. Not just he, but others have introduced legislation increasing reporting requirements for federal agencies of their awardees, and that means more requirements for the awardees to report. A few other things they talk about there. It acknowledges the vital basic and applied research contributions, recognizing again that research security not only focuses on applied research, but even basic research. The increase in research and technology transfer investments in enhancing our competitiveness, as I said just a moment ago. It further acknowledges the national benefit of building that diverse geographic research capacity, as we talked about, bringing the nation's full talent complement to bear on this. The intent to continue to look for opportunities to reduce administrative burden on researchers. So they're encouraging federal grant awardees to use efficiencies. So for example, in research security, we're seeing a lot of people hiring a lot of analysts and a lot of staff, but there are more efficient ways to get there from here, and they're going to encourage that. Although they do allow for research security to be paid for through your grant application, and they are going to be looking on the grant applications for research security provisions, as with anything, they want you to be efficient with that. Utilizing outside contractor or outside tools that can help you become more efficient. So in the act itself, I'm going to go through a few things that it directs. And I'll use OSTP instead of saying out loud the Office of Science, Technology, and Policy. OSTP is directed to issue guidance to federal research agencies to prohibit participation in foreign talent recruitment programs and provide further clarification to the community what that means, what a foreign talent recruit program is. And later they define another term that you've probably heard. It was previously in the National Defense Authorization Act, but taken out to go into the Administrative or America's Competes Act, but then found its way into CHIPS, and that's maligned talent programs. It also directs the Office of Science, Technology, and Policy to issue guidelines for universities to develop research security training programs. That's a big lift, but the good news is there are training programs out there. We provide them as well as others, but you can take a look at those that meet that standard and meet that requirement, because the other thing it directs is that the agencies establish requirements for your researchers that work on agency awards to complete that training. OSTP is also to issue guidance clarifying that researchers working on federal supported programs have to disclose participation in foreign talent programs. Now, that seems contradictory to the above statement that says prohibit participation, but it's the recruitment aspect of it that's very telling. So you've got to disclose it if you're a part of a talent program. That's recognizing that a lot of people are part of talent programs, and there's nothing illegal about being a part of a talent program, but you have to recognize who you're partnering with and whether that partnership is transparent and reciprocal. And oftentimes, with the talent programs from the People's Republic of China or the Communist Party there, it's not. So they have to be disclosed so an assessment can be made. OSTP also has to issue guidance for federal research agencies to prohibit working on agency-funded projects participating in maligned foreign talent programs, and they define that, and we'll get into that in a moment. Okay, this next one is the big one. The CHIPS Act directs federal research agencies to implement OSTP guidance. This includes NSPM 33 and ensuring subsequent agency policies are consistent to the greatest extent practicable. Now, you've heard about some templates that have come out on reporting requirements and reporting forms. That's an effort to get at that consistency piece. There's still work to be done there, and they're still working on that. But what's critical about this particular bullet is that prior to the passage of the CHIPS Act, because OSTP is not a directive body with authority, they had to rely on the federal agencies, the federal awarding agencies, individual authorities, and the grant agreements themselves to get those guidelines to become a requirement. And the agencies were moving at different paces. And the reason is because they're beholden to different laws. So for example, the National Institutes of Health is beholden to the Administrative Procedures Act on their grant awards. And so anything outside of the grant agreement or grants policy statement that would constitute a new rule or requirement would require, under the Administrative Procedures Act, public notice, a federal registry notice, public comment. And that's a long logistics tail to get a decision made. NSF, for example, though, many of their grants are not under the APA, and they can institute new requirements. They have the ability to do that, or in their regulations, they've already established those more stringent rules, and they wouldn't have to go through the public comment. Under the CHIPS Act, with the CHIPS Act directing that OSTP guidance be implemented, that may eliminate the requirement for agencies like NIH to do some of that public notice. And so new rules and new regulations could come a lot faster than they otherwise would. And those of you that sat through the NSPM 33 presentation that we did will remember that I said that it's going to happen in stages and in different paces. Well, I think that pace is now going to be accelerated. So effectively, the CHIPS Act effectively codifies NSPM 33. It also directs federal research agencies to make sure that security policies and process don't lead to discrimination and targeting. Again, conduct, not culture. Big emphasis on that. It directs the Secretary of Energy to develop, maintain tools. The big takeaway here is working with the Office of the Director of National Intelligence. So part of what we at IP Talents do with intelligence gathering and gathering that open source information, ODNI can go into deeper places in the classified realm, but most of what we're looking for in the compliance world is focused on open source, and we've got access to that, and we cross-reference that with our threat intelligence and point out where the risk is. It authorizes federal research agencies to require submission of contracts and agreements and other supporting documentation upon request. Now, in the grants policy statement and the grant agreement that many entities have, it already requires that you have some type of records retention or records schedule. I think I saw the National Institutes of Health Office of Management Assessment director of the division that owns records management at NIH, so she'll appreciate this. Anna, it's for you. A record schedule requires you to maintain those records for a certain period of time, and that maintenance, it specifically states that you have to have them available to the funding agency. CHIPS goes a bit further and says, when they ask for it, you will provide it. And that's because they've had trouble doing that. And this doesn't just apply to the grantee. Any sub-awardee or other person that you've applied to that grant, the grant policy statement and grant agreement envelops all of whomever works on that grant funding. And finally, CHIPS affirms the intent of Congress to recognize the beneficial international collaboration activities and that they are not prohibited. Now, for years, they've been encouraged, but they wanted to make sure that statement was specifically made, that they are not prohibited. I'm not going to read this entire slide to you. These slides will be available for download for those of you who registered, but it's important to note that they finally defined this, and and I'll summarize it this way. Anyone who receives any type of compensation, either direct, in kind, or indirect, in exchange for improperly transferring intellectual property or materials, being required to recruit others to do that, establishing a lab, anything that creates a conflict of commitment, applying for foreign recipients, omitting acknowledgements, anything that you're required to do that's outside of that agreement or usurps the relationship that you have. So for example, with every grant from NIH, NIH has a right of first refusal when it comes to the intellectual property on that. But if a researcher enters into an agreement with an external entity that intellectual property belongs to them, you've usurped the NIH's property. And the US people who have paid for that funding, they have that interest, and NIH manages that interest on behalf of the American people. So that's the definition of maligned. A maligned program is one that provides compensation in cash or in kind or any either direct or indirect in exchange for some of these unauthorized things. So the details, I talked about the regional innovation hubs a little bit, those 20 geographically distributed regional technology innovation hubs, lots of money going to that. That's really exciting, but it's going to increase the requirement for research security programs. And if you are fortunate enough to be a part of that, you're going to need to be able to demonstrate that you're a trusted partner, someone who can take seriously and proactively your research security. They're going to be looking for that in the grant awards, not just every award is going to be looking for research security management, but these awards are specifically going to be looking for those trusted partners. The Entrepreneurial Fellowship and Planning and Capacity Building Awards is kind of exciting. One of the root causes of this whole issue that we've identified at IP Talons is that researchers want to, in some cases, monetize all of the work that they've done. Many of them are intrinsically motivated, they just want the recognition, but others see an opportunity that maybe they don't feel taken care of at their institution, or maybe they feel like that they are worthy of greater acknowledgement. And so this kind of gets at that root cause by recognizing the entrepreneurial nature of research and providing fellowships in that regard, and planning and capacity building as well. Visiting researchers, I talked about that briefly. The State Department is going to put stricter limits on immigration, stiffer penalties for scientists who fail to disclose their foreign ties and grant applications, and a lower threshold for individuals and institutions to report foreign gifts. My colleague Bucky at the Department of Education has been on this, and that's an even greater emphasis. It's going to be harder. It's more reporting requirements for universities. There was a lot of pushback on this, but that's part of what the federal government is doing to increase their oversight presence and meet their oversight responsibilities. And then the fifth surprise, the implementing research security management. You're going to have a formal research security and compliance program that proactively manages your conflicts of interest in order to, one, get best consideration, just like your record schedule, just like your data sharing plan. They'll all be considerations in the grant. And then if you want to go after some of those higher end programs that are more secure, you're absolutely going to have to demonstrate yourself as a trusted partner. How do you do that? Well, the elements in the CHIPS Act that talked about research security management emphasis, there's a requirement for reporting on support online resources to inform institutions and researchers about a new office that's been created in the Office of Research Security and Policy. It's the Chief Research Security Officer. It supports research in the environment and factors related to misconduct. They have to develop plans with respect to controlled information and background screening. These are the agencies, but this is going to flow down to the awardees. Conducting of risk assessments, proactive risk assessments using information contained in award proposals and related disclosures. That's one of the more popular services that we provide. We get calls regularly and have done a number of these where we come in and look at your program, we look at all of your policies, we dig through them and show you where the gaps and seams are and what you can do to bring your program to maturity and identify risks more proactively. You've got to have a plan with respect to your controlled information and your background screening to identify and do due diligence for granting access. Again, this is an agency requirement that's going to flow to the awardee. You're going to have to do due diligence to identify who's coming in and what they're going to have access to. It directs the National Science Foundation to develop a plan for identifying areas of research that can involve access to classified and controlled information and exercise due diligence there as well. And then it directs the foundation also to collect annual summaries of the foreign financial support. So 50,000 more is the threshold. That goes to that gift point that I was talking about a moment ago, and contracts received directly or indirectly from a foreign source. And then they also create a research security integrity information sharing analysis organization. This is an effort to make sure that a bad actor at one place doesn't just leave and come back. We've heard a great deal about how to get after this risk and how to address it. And you've actually heard major funding organizations tout the terminations and resignations that happen as a result of their activities. That's not a win for anybody. What is necessary and what Congress has made crystal clear in the CHIPS Act is a researcher-friendly approach to fixing a compliance problem. Yes, there is a small percentage who have acted in such a way that it's criminal in nature, and that's where the FBI comes in. And a lot of awardees are reaching out to our brothers and sisters in the FBI and getting a lot of great support, but you have to recognize their focus is finding those bad actors who have conducted themselves in a criminal manner and which the assistant U.S. attorneys will prosecute. And there are very few of those. The vast majority of this problem is compliance, so you need a compliance approach. And that's what the CHIPS Act establishes and codifies with the NSPM 33 guidelines to help you do that. That's the information I have for you today. We'll stop and open for questions. Thank you for listening, and we appreciate your participation. Alan, Adriana, do we have any questions that would like to be answered? And I will caveat and say that we'll also have an opportunity to answer any questions we get in the chat.
I was just looking at there are no.
Go ahead.
Yep, sorry, there's no questions in the chat, but as Mike mentioned, if you want to talk offline, we can go ahead, Adriana.
There's actually one question that just came through, so I want to make sure that gets heard. So the question is, are these new elevated requirements limited to computer chip research, or do they extend to the health science area and the NIH?
Yeah, that's a great question. The fact is that's kind of the confusing part. Since they jammed the Americas Competes Act and the USECA into the CHIPS Act, the research, although CHIPS is focused on the development of chips, the research security component is primarily applying to biomedical research and other critical infrastructure research, any federally funded research, including the chips, by the way, but also including biomedical or any infrastructure research that you may be participating in.
All right, perfect. We have one more question coming in, but it looks like they are typing it up right now.
Okay.
So we'll just go ahead and wait. Oh, not sure if they're still typing it, but nothing has come through. Stefano, I think if you still have a question, let us know. But if any other questions too as well, please send it through.
Yeah, we'll be happy to answer questions either individually or I think I inadvertently dropped our contact information off the screen, but we'll be happy to answer any questions you have. If you need more insights on chips or would like to know more about how we can help you, then we're happy to answer that as well.
All right, the question came through and it was worth waiting for. It's quite lengthy. So it is, the bluff of what the CHIPS Act represents is that there is more of a lift being pushed to the awardees in terms of remaining in compliance. Is that accurate? And if so, what percentage of research institutions do you estimate are adequately prepared for this scenario?
Wow, great question. Yes, that's exactly what it is. The federal government's finally recognizing that they have not been meeting their oversight requirements. That's just a blunt statement. And I'm sorry to any of my former colleagues who are on the line, but you know as well as I do, there needs to be more. So what percentage? I would suspect you're going to see varying degrees. And one of the things that Alan and I have heard as we've gone around and spoken to many universities and other awardees is there's a spectrum of response. Some of them are being extremely proactive. I don't want to call out any NCAA conferences, but the SEC is doing a better job than most of being proactive and looking forward. But others are taking a wait and see approach. Well, we'll deal with it when it's a problem. When I get a letter from one of the major funding agencies telling me I might have a problem, then I'll look at it. And they're going and hiring, very high dollar attorneys to help them take a look at this. And that's unnecessary, it's a waste. So to answer the question on percentage, I would probably say that 80%, and Alan, you can correct me if you think that number's off, but 80%, 80 to 90% have work to do. 80% have a lot of work to do, and there are very few that really have this dialed in. And with the new requirements, everyone's going to need some help.
Yeah, I would agree with that, Mike. It's the schools that are actually proactively managing this risk are certainly in the minority group. So we're anticipating the next year, the timing of this implementation is going to create a mad scramble for most research universities to get a proactive program in place.
But the good news is there's help out there. All right, if there are no other questions, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. Yeah, thanks, Mike. And if you do have, obviously this is a sensitive area for a lot of attendees and a lot of universities. And so if you'd like to chat offline in a more private setting, we're happy to take an email or just hit our website, and we'll be happy to, or hit us in the email, and we'll be happy to follow up offline. And appreciate it. I know we're at the end of the session here, so we appreciate those that attended live, and certainly those that of you that will attend or listen to the or watch the recorded session. We thank you for that as well.
Well, thank you again, everyone, and we hope you'll check out our upcoming webinars. We're trying to do these on a regular basis and make them relevant to you and to help you in your decision process. And our whole goal is to be a support to your team. So let us know how we can help you, and we thank you again for your time.